2 million people are at risk of going hungry after a drought has damaged a lot of crops in Central America. Lower than average rainfall in June and July has led to major crop losses for small-scale maize and bean farmers in Guatemala, Ecuador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It says this means subsistence farmers will not have enough food to eat or sell in the coming months and have no food supplies to see them through the lean time between harvests. In Canada, a June frost dealt a heavy blow to fall fruit crops. Some farms have lost more than half their crop, which translates into thousands of dollars. Some people have as little as 10%. This was from a late frost in June. The temperature dipped to minus 1.5 Celsius on June 4, making it one of the coldest June nights ever recorded in the Annapolis Valley. In India, the plantation sector may have suffered 5,000 crore lost due to floods. A crore is 10 million rupees. The damage includes tea, coffee, rubber, cardamom, and pepper. They say that the extent of the damage is unprecedented. In some cases, substantial area under cultivation has been lost due to landslips. The losses include those of field crops and stocks in warehouses, and they may increase due to attacks from pests and fungi in the coming months. A loss of 41 to 64% in tea is being expected. In Austria, the government is going to provide 60 million euros in aid to drought-affected farmers. The thing is that, you can give them this money, but that does not replace the actual loss of food. It says livestock farmers were particularly hard hit with up to 40% of grasslands in some regions affected by the drought, forcing them to buy food for their animals elsewhere. Crop failures were also a problem, estimated to have affected 10 to 15% of crop totals. In the Philippines, floods have caused a 1.3 million peso loss to rice farmers in the southern Negros province. In Canada, they are assessing potential frost damage on crops. This seems to be forward-looking because it says if frost does occur, then they have an idea about what the damage might be. Typically, wheat is more tolerant than barley, and barley is more tolerant than oat to frost. Depends upon the stage. If you go below 0 degrees centigrade, which is freezing, this will cause reduced yield and the kernels will become light and shriveled. They are saying that damage to canola from frost is dependent on the seed moisture content and the time of the frost, whereas flax can withstand frost and weathering conditions better than some other plants if the plants are maturing and seed moisture is dropping. For sunflowers, a frost event any time before physiological maturity can cause damage. Soybeans and dry edible beans are easily damaged by light frosts in the minus 2°C to 0°C range. The point at which corn is safe from frost is defined as physiological maturity and is correlated with the appearance of the thin black layer of dead tissue at the tips of the kernels. Silage yield losses can accrue quickly depending on the severity of the frost. There's no good news here. In Europe, how drought plunged farmers into despair. The summer of 2018 saw record-breaking temperatures across the European Union, and while many lavished in the warm weather by heading to the beach, farmers in the fields were confronted with a crisis. Dairy farmers were worst hit by the drought in the UK, sending herds of cattle to slaughter because there wasn't enough fodder. Backlogs at the abattoir reached 4 weeks. This is probably the worst drought most people have known in their lifetimes, said Minette Batters. Certainly on a par with the last serious drought we had, which was 1976. What's more, the drought came on the back of what Batters describes as a really hard winter, which meant fodder supplies were extremely low, if not completely used up, across the UK as farmers went into spring. In Germany, there was a similar picture with feed for cattle in critically short supply. This year we have the lowest harvest of the century, said Udo Hemmerling. We have had very severe losses, especially in northern and eastern Germany, and our neighbors in Scandinavia and Poland are seeing the same bad situation. In Kenya, farmers of Baringo South are counting losses after an outbreak of lumpy skin. The viral disease was first reported in Ayatia, Kinyach, Marigat, Barwesa, Bartabwa, Kabartonho, and Kaboeski 2 months ago. The greatest loss from the disease is a decrease in milk yield, reduced value of the hide, poor quality of beef, and losses associated with anticipated deaths. He attributed the outbreak to an increase in mosquitoes after recent rains. Meanwhile, goats and sheep have been struck by contagious caprine pleuropneumonia disease, a bacterial condition that damages the lung tissue and starves it of oxygen. Signs of CCP include depression, dullness, weakness, and lethargy, fever, and weight loss. Infected animals also exhibit respiratory difficulties, including coughing, labored breathing, and nasal discharge. In the Chinese province of Shiguang, farmers are recovering from natural disaster. 2 recent typhoons affected all 635 towns in the 81 counties and 13 cities of Shandong to various degrees. Various provinces such as Weifang, Qingzhou, and Lingqiu were among the most affected areas. It affected more than 100,000 vegetable greenhouses in Shiguang, and I saw another story that said 200,000 of these passive solar greenhouses were destroyed by this. It says at present more than 66,000 greenhouses have been drained, and the remaining 40,000 are currently being emptied of flood water. Coffee farmers in an Indian state have seen their hopes for a crop dashed by rains. Coffee farmers in this state were relieved when the flowers bloomed after good pre-monsoon showers in April. They hoped this season would help them recoup the loss they had incurred last year owing to the drought-like situation. However, incessant rain since June has dashed their hopes as the coffee berries have been affected by various diseases. Land subsidence and landslips have destroyed plantations in the hills, including coffee-growing areas in Idukki and Palakkad districts. One farmer said that he had lost his house due to land subsidence, which also destroyed 1.5 acres of his coffee plantation. The spread of diseases such as black rot disease and heavy berry dropping owing to the infestation of mealybugs had increased considerably this year owing to the heavy rain. Coffee Board has estimated a crop loss of 9,000 to 10,000 tons of coffee. In Canada, Alberta farmers have been struggling with drought-induced crop loss. Although the province as a whole is expected to have good quality crops, dryland farmers in the south will be particularly affected by the dry conditions. Conditions in the region are so severe that some producers have turned to insurance to make up for their losses, so the money comes back but the crop doesn't. This is probably getting to be some of the worst years we've seen in the past decade. A guy named Larry Williams, who owns a farm near Airdrie, mentioned that his crop yields could be down 30% due to the dry growing conditions. But he told the CBC that he has heard from other farmers who are anticipated crop yield losses as high as 50%. In India, a new migrant insect is causing huge losses to dozens of crop found in Karnataka. The pest has been damaging maize plants in certain parts of the state and is not a native and known species in India. The pest, Spodoptera frugiperda, is a species of armyworm hitherto not found in India. First found in the May-June period, causing extensive damage to the crops. This bug is a known pest in parts of North America from Canada to Chile and Argentina. It is also reported to have spread to Africa in 2017, causing widespread crop damage. The finding of this bug is significant since its larvae have been found to feed on almost every important crop grown in India, including maize, rice, sorghum, sugarcane, cabbage, beet, peanuts, soybeans, alfalfa, onion, tomato, potato, and cotton. In yet another India story, flood strips Kerala kitchen stocks by 1/3. They've left the state's grocery basket bare by at least 1/3. Day-to-day food needs of 4.5 million people are in jeopardy. Or is that 45 million? As the policymakers grapple with the gargantuan devastation of milk cows, chicken, ducks, and food grains. There's damages in paddy, banana, spices, and other crops. The thing about the loss of food crops in India is that a lot of American companies depend upon Indian companies in India to do computer work for them. And if loss of food crops and subsequent starvation and so on leads to social disorder, these companies could find themselves being hurt by the domestic chaos in India. Electroverse.net is another good source of information about the food situation. And in this article, China's inflation hits a 6-month high, driven by the surge in food prices due to extreme weather, also exacerbated by an outbreak of swine flu. Food prices have risen 1.7% from last year and much faster than the 0.5% gain a month earlier. So this is up 1.7% in a single month, apparently. China's CPI surprise signals the largest increase since February, driven up on the back of a 9% rise in vegetable prices as supplies were disrupted by heavy rains in Liaoning and Jilin provinces and severe flooding in Shandong province. So here again, dependency, okay? The United States and many other so-called first world countries depend upon China for a flow of manufacturing goods, and chaos in China due to starvation could certainly disrupt those supply chains. Here's another story from China, where China's soybean futures were set for the biggest daily gain on record after cold weather descends. The futures soared 5% on Monday morning. This was after the 10th of September. The average daily temperature in China's northeast region fell to 8.7 degrees centigrade on Saturday, well below the average for the time of year of 16.3 centigrade. And of course, here is where the argument with the U.S. over soybeans comes back to haunt them, in the sense that American farmers have decided to produce fewer soybeans because of this trade conflict, and now China is having losses of soybean production, which means they're really going to get hurt as this goes on. And on September 8th, an early winter freeze is forecast to blast Europe. Biting winds and sub-zero temperatures threaten to plunge Europe into an early winter freeze, among predictions that Arctic misery could grip the continent as early as October. Even a weak El Niño event drives a trend towards colder weather across Europe. On top of this, we have solar output which is falling off of a cliff. So here you get all those combined effects. If you think back to the spring, there were a lot of delays and even non-planting of crops all through northern Europe, and now we're having an early frost, which damages the crops that are in. The other point being that, come the spring, it seems reasonable to expect another delayed planting season, and if present trends continue, then another early frost that will cause more crop damage. A lot of times, the planet, or particular places on the planet, can survive one bad year of crops because they have some reserves. But when you start getting to 2 and 3 years of bad crops, you start to have very serious problems with famine. And that's why it's important for all of us to grow what we can. And if you look at my channel or look at my videos, you will see everything I know about growing microgreens, because I think that is going to be one of the most important crops that you can do for yourself going forward, because you get a crop every 2 weeks and the produce is very tasty and highly nutritious.